Capone, a name that still sends chills down the spine of Chicago's history. A man who went from an ambitious young mobster to the undisputed king of the underworld. But how did he do it? And why is his reign considered one of the bloodiest and most notorious periods in organized crime? Let's find out. In our last episode, we delved into the early roots of the Chicago outfit. We explored how the seeds of the mafia were planted by Big Jim Colosimo, a man who built an empire based on gambling and vice. His assassination opened the door for Johnny Torrio, a more organized and visionary leader. Torrio saw the golden opportunity in Prohibition, and along with his young protege, Al Capone, turned bootlegging into a lucrative criminal enterprise. Torrio's reign ended abruptly after an assassination attempt in 1925. Torrio stepped aside, leaving Capone, just 26 years old, in charge of the outfit. And what followed was an era of unprecedented violence, wealth, and power. But also the beginning of the end. Capone's rise to power. When Johnny Torrio handed the reins to Al Capone, it marked a major turning point. Torrio may have built the outfit's foundation, but Capone would take it to the next level. He was ruthless, ambitious, and knew that controlling the city's bootlegging operations would be key to his success. Unlike other mobsters, Capone didn't shy away from the spotlight. He cultivated a public image that portrayed him as a charitable man, throwing lavish parties and donating to various causes, all while running the city's most powerful criminal empire from the shadows. Capone's style of leadership was a mix of business savvy and outright terror. He was well aware that in order to solidify his control over Chicago, he needed to outmaneuver not just the law, but rival gangs as well. He quickly expanded his empire, establishing control over speakeasies, brothels, gambling dens, and more. Every illegal racket in Chicago had to answer to him, and if they didn't, the consequences were often deadly. Capone's empire in the 1920s. By the mid-1920s, Capone was bringing in an estimated $60 million a year just from bootlegging, making him one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the country. His control over Chicago's underworld was so complete that he operated with near impunity. Capone had police officers, politicians, and judges on his payroll, ensuring that the outfit's operations went largely unchallenged. Prohibition turned out to be the perfect storm for Capone's ambitions. Alcohol was banned, but the demand for it only grew. Capone's organization smuggled in massive quantities of liquor from Canada and the Caribbean, flooding Chicago's speakeasies with illegal booze. But this was just the beginning. Capone expanded into narcotics, prostitution, and protection rackets. In essence, if there was money to be made illegally in Chicago, Capone was taking his cut. Yet for all his wealth and influence, Capone's grip on power was constantly threatened by rival gangs, particularly the North Side Gang, led by Dean O'Banion. Chicago was effectively divided between the South Side, controlled by Capone's outfit, and the North Side, where O'Banion held sway. The bloody turf wars. Capone knew that in order to maintain control, he needed to eliminate his enemies. Dean O'Banion was his primary rival, and the two engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse. O'Banion was a thorn in Capone's side, controlling much of the North Side's bootlegging operations, and neither was willing to back down. In 1924, Capone made his move. O'Banion was shot and killed inside his own flower shop by members of the outfit, sparking the infamous Chicago Beer Wars. What followed was a series of violent confrontations between Capone's South Side Gang and the remaining members of the North Side Gang. For Capone, violence wasn't just a tool, it was part of his business strategy. If you didn't submit to his rule, you were eliminated. The resulting turf wars turned Chicago into a war zone. Bombings, assassinations, and shootouts became an almost daily occurrence as Capone's outfit fought for control over the city. But Capone's most infamous act of violence was yet to come: the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. On February 14, 1929, Capone's men orchestrated what would become one of the most notorious events in organized crime history, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Disguised as police officers, Capone's hitmen lured 7 members of the North Side Gang into a garage and executed them in cold blood. The massacre shocked the nation and marked a turning point in Capone's reign. While Capone was never directly tied to the massacre, everyone knew who was behind it. The brutality of the event solidified Capone's reputation as the most feared man in Chicago, but it also drew unwanted attention from law enforcement. The public, once intrigued by Capone's larger-than-life persona, began to turn against him. The massacre painted a clear picture. Capone wasn't just a businessman, he was a cold-blooded killer, and the federal government, now more determined than ever, began ramping up their efforts to take him down. The downfall begins. Law enforcement closes. And despite his careful control over the city, Capone couldn't escape the growing pressure from law enforcement. Elliot Ness, a Prohibition agent with a team of incorruptible officers known as the Untouchables, was tasked with taking down Capone's bootlegging operation. While Ness and his men didn't land the fatal blow on Capone, they made life significantly harder for him, conducting raids and seizing shipments of illegal alcohol. But Capone's downfall wouldn't come from violence or racketeering. It came from something much more mundane: taxes. The federal government had been quietly building a case against Capone for tax evasion, knowing that his lavish lifestyle didn't match the income he claimed on his returns. The irony? After all the murders, the extortion, and the smuggling, it was his unpaid taxes that would bring him down. Conclusion: at the height of his power, Al Capone controlled the most feared and powerful criminal organization in the country. His empire spanned bootlegging, gambling, prostitution, and more, all while he maintained an iron grip on Chicago through violence and corruption. But despite his seemingly invincible status, Capone's reign was starting to crumble. As the 1920s drew to a close, so too did Capone's time as king of the underworld. The federal government was closing in, and soon the very wealth that made him untouchable would become his greatest vulnerability. Teaser for Part 3. In the next episode, we'll dive into Capone's final years as the most wanted man in America. From Elliot Ness's relentless pursuit to the fateful trial that would end it all, we'll explore how Capone's empire came crashing down. Stay tuned for Part 3, The Fall of Al Capone.